Good afternoon, everyone. How are we all doing? You're all welcome to our Artist Talk, the Anderson Lecture Series. This is our last series, so I'm so excited to see you all. I hope we enjoy this. So, my name is Beatrice Atinka. I'm currently the John M. Anderson Assistant Teaching Professor of Art in the School of Visual Art. Um, and I'm also in this capacity coordinating the Anderson Lecture Series along with my team, the Events and Award Committee. So I would like to mention that this room was made possible through Tim and Lauren, and they helped give us this comfortable space. I would like to extend um, a good thank you to the director of the School of Visual Art, Wagner Mendoza Whitehead, and also thank the Director of Sustainability Studies, Mi Hang Kang, who also helped supported this lecture series as well. Now I'm moving on to a little bit of history for the Anderson Lecture Series. It's so important, so I like you all to kind of like hear that and understand why we are having this lecture for free. The John M. Anderson Endowment in Visual Arts was established in 2001 with the purpose of supporting outstanding programming, such as this lecture series and related activities with guest artists that we bring onto our campus for our grad students, undergrads, and everybody to kind of like enjoy. So this artist talk is open to the public. It's free. So remember to bring someone along, your loved ones, your family, so we can all enjoy together. At this point, I would like to invite to the podium Anne Holt, Assistant Professor of Art Education and Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies here in Penn State. And Anne is going to introduce our artist, Mohamed Sleiman Labat. So let's give a round of applause for Anne while she comes over.
Thank you so much. I'm going to read because I was instructed to keep this under, well, even 3 minutes was too long, and there's a lot to say. So I am so happy and honored to be here introducing Mohammed, who is a visual artist, filmmaker, and writer, born and raised in the Sawari refugee camps. I met Mohammed through my artist collective Arts Action Group with my colleague, Dr. Cindy McGuire, who met Mohammed in 2013 when they were invited to do workshops as part of the Arti Fariti Art Festival in the camps. Since then, Arts Action has had many collaborations, and with me now since I began at Penn State in 2022. Mohammed serves on the editorial board of my co-edited journal, Arts, Culture, and Development. In spring 2023, we began what we're calling a Sister Garden Exchange, which we will share on April 16th, and that's part of the College Sustainability Council Teaching and Learning Roundtable, and it'll be in the Borland project space. I want to acknowledge also the Penn State Student Farm for being welcoming of this work because we have access to the greenhouse and all kinds of growing materials. Mohammed's work explores the multifaceted political, environmental, and social issues that affect his local community in the Hamada Desert and the world at large. His awards are many to list, but they include from the Cultural Institute of Radical Contemporary Art, the Science, Technology, and Arts Starts Prize Africa, and then in 2024, the Prince Claus Fund Mentorship Award for Cultural and Artistic Responses to Environmental Crises. And this work brought him to the Amazon forest in Brazil this past September. In 2019, his phosphate project with Pekka Niskanen was funded by the Kone Foundation in Helsinki, Finland, which resulted in his film Desert Phosphate, which will be screening here at the Hub Flex Theater as part of the Penn State Sustainability Summit on April 23rd at 7 p.m. He has exhibited at the Photography Gallery Hippolyta in Helsinki, Finland, the Helsinki Biennial in Finland, where he also exhibited at the Museum of Impossible Forms, the Luleå Biennial in Sweden, Culturescapes in Switzerland, and recently in California in African American Museum. In 2022, Mohamed contributed a chapter to my co-edited book, Arts and Culture in Global Development Practice, Expression, Identity, and Empowerment. His chapter is called A Temple of Art in the Middle of the Desert, Reflections on Creating Motif Art Studio and the Role of Art in the Sawari refugee camps. And I'm just going to read an excerpt from his chapter just to give context to his daily life and experiences that inform his purpose as an artist. So this is Mohammed's excerpt. My parents have lived as nomads in different parts of Western Sahara, just like the rest of the Sawari. Formerly known as Spanish Sahara during the Spanish colonization, Western Sahara is now widely referred to Africa's last colony. In November 1975, Morocco invaded the territory. A war of resistance led by the Frente Polisario broke out and only ended after the UN brokered ceasefire in 1991. Many Sawari communities sought refuge in Algeria, where they established 5 refugee camps near the border town of Tindouf. These camps consist of basic infrastructure of fabric tents and hand-built mud houses. The tents symbolize the temporality of the situation, as well as a connection to the Sawari past nomadism. So it's in this context which Mohamed practices, and now I give you the artist himself. So please welcome Mohamed Sleiman Labat.
So this is where I live. This is my neighborhood, and um, that's the kind of environmental odds we're up against. The refugee camps were established in 1975, so it's been 50 years now of living in these refugee camps. I was born here, so my parents arrived here in 75, 76. And they're basically basic structures of fabric tents and mud houses, and these are, some of the electricity poles that have been introduced a few years ago. Um, and but there is a lot of, and goats in between, but people still live in tents and mud houses. These are some more other pictures of how the camp look like, especially in the time of the summer. This is some photographs that have been documenting life in the refugee camps. Um, but the kind of desert where we are is called the Hamada Desert, can be surprising in different ways. So yes, it's very hot and dry and dusty and stormy desert, but it can also be in a different situation. A few years ago, in 2015, we had a huge flood that took our community by surprise. And the flood was, as we live in mud houses, the flood just started to erode the bottom of the people's homes. And then homes started to fall down within 15 minutes or so. And this is our home. I lost almost everything, my artworks, my books, and my laptop in this flood. And so many other people as well. Many people lost their possessions and things in this flood. But immediately, a month or so after the rain had stopped and the flood is over, we started to rebuild our home from the rubble, from the broken things that we have lost in this flood. My brother and I were carrying all the broken adobe and rebuilding our home again with the support of other people who come from time to time. And but I was really devastated by the loss of so many things in our home, but also around the community. And that was when I started to think about establishing a place, a proper space where I can create, where I can invite others to create their own art as well. And it was a bit surprising to many people that, okay, after such a disaster, why would you thinking about an art space? But of all the things I wanted to do is to have a space where I can heal, where I can process these things through art. So it was very important for me to engage myself in a process of recreating from the broken things to establish some sort of a space where I can create art. And that's when this journey of creating an art space in the refugee camps in the middle of the desert has started. I was salvaging all sorts of reclaimed materials and broken stuff, and there was huge pile of broken stuff next to our tent, and people were like, "What are you doing? What are all these broken stuff doing here?" And I only had an idea and a vision to put together some sort of a space where I can create art. But slowly, over one full year of making and breaking and experimenting, I started to create Motif Art Studio with the support of some friends, a few power tools. I started to create my space and use it as a safe space for me to create and invite others to create their artworks for kids to learn as well. I had a lot of collaboration with kids in the local community and local schools to be able to come and use all of these discarded materials after the disaster to be able to create artworks. I have some photography courses with some other photography teachers who came to the studio. So the studio became kind of a small hub for experimenting and creating and collaborating, but also learning and sharing. And a lot of young people nowadays come to my space also to create their own artworks or to engage in other collaborations. And that was very, very important as I see this journey of something becoming interesting for me and for others as well. There's more pictures of people coming and visiting the studio to create their own artworks or share. But at some point, I was really getting a bit overwhelmed with working with all of these discarded materials and things that I had to deal with. And I realized through some connections that there is some other people working with other interesting projects. And that's when I came to learn about the work of Tal Ibrahim, an amazing agricultural engineer working with families to create small-scale family gardens in our community. At first, it was really surprising for me that, okay, but how can you, this is Tal Ibrahim, photographed him in his garden. I was like, how can you have a garden here in the desert? It's impossible with all of the challenges that we have. And on a daily basis, when you walk in the camp, you don't see any plants or anything. It's really open desert landscape. But this guy is genius. And he's a proper agricultural engineer, but the odds he's against are really overwhelming and concrete. And so he's starting to educate the families, including our family and many other families, to learn how to set up a small-scale family garden in the desert with the limitations and stresses that we have. So he invited me, and I started to be involved more with the practice of creating gardens, of developing solutions, but also telling the story and sharing it with others. So it was very transformative experience for me to be able to learn that it is possible to create food in the Hamada Desert. Now, the challenges are many, but the collaborative work of input from scientists, here, the agriculture engineer and community member. This is Tal Ibrahim and my friend Mohamed Sleiman from the Nomad Garden and others as well. The knowledge is developing to create food in this very challenging situation. And what is interesting is that, of course, the agriculture engineers and the farmers, they have the kind of knowledge of how to perhaps grow some plants, but the community are also embracing that knowledge and taking it into their own hands to different ways of creating and interacting with the gardens. Some photos from the Nomad Garden of Mohamed Salim, who's experimenting with animal and plants and other materials in a very interesting way that he would like to bring some of our nomadic roots into his practice and creating a possibility for his garden to be a nomad and to move around. And the gardens are really transforming our community in a way we have never seen before. To be in a desert where there are no plants, and then all of a sudden you get to see different colors and different smells and different tastes is really something that took us all by surprise. This is something new to us, but it's developing because of these transdisciplinary, cross-disciplinary approach of input from different communities in an environment where the challenges are suppressing these creation. But to my surprise, those challenges are becoming a drive to solutions in the gardens and in the community. Uh, this is a photograph that I have taken some time ago in the garden, and it shows what kind of temperature we are living in order to create that garden in the desert. Of course, it can be very challenging to grow your garden for a while, and you're happy with it in the winter, and then by April, May, it started to get to, I'm going to say now, in 120 Fahrenheit, because we usually use Celsius, and then the plants really started to go down, and it's really not a great feeling to see all of your important work going down because of these challenges. Uh, some of the stills from the film that you have just shown, but actually these challenges that I have been mentioning of crazy sandstorms, incredible heat levels, and in a desert where it's just sand, there is no organic content in the soil. What can we do? The knowledge has been developing as to farm in a way that will exactly respond to those challenges. What we are developing in the desert is called sandoponic, as opposed to hydroponic, where people are growing food or growing plants in water medium. We're growing in sand. This is a photo from my installation at the Helsinki Biennial a couple of years ago. And sandoponic is basically using sand as a medium to grow plants instead of water, because we can't afford to grow water. We didn't have enough water in the desert. And it's been spreading and booming in the desert because we have a number of the number of family gardens in the community now are over 1,000 gardens in this community in a place where you hardly get to see any plants. Some photos of the gardens in the community. This is Tal Ibrahim with one of the women who have a garden as well. And I gotta say that this transformation is not just because the Sahrawi decided, okay, we're in a desert, let's have a garden, or let's agree in the desert or something. No, this is this is happening because there is a real need to have access to basic food. This refugee camp has been there for a very long time, and it has been dependent on food aid. And the food aid is very limited in nutritional value. So the scientists and the artists and the community members are coming together to think through these problems. And we're thinking if the families could learn how to set up a small scale family garden, then we'll be able to have access to nutritional food. So it's very important that we develop this knowledge in order for us to survive. This is a photo from my garden, and we've had tomatoes and the set of vegetables and things that we are growing in these camps a really basic set of vegetables. There is nothing fancy about these gardens because it's responding to this very critical challenge of food shortage and food limitation and the nutritional value. And so this is my mother in the first harvest that we ever had when we harvested tomato for the first time ever. And she was crying at the moment. And to be able to see the transformation that we could have in our community through this collaborative work, bringing food on the table, but also for me as an artist to see people experiencing poetics of the desert and poetics of a garden in the desert, to be able to smell and touch, see green things. Please don't take all the greenery around here for granted. We don't have a lot of green stuff. It's very important for us to be able to experience these poetics. And so I try to tell this story in order to highlight the importance of artists engaging in such social and environmental issues, that art can bring something to the table. I'm not taking credit. This is a collaborative work of so many people giving their input to these gardens. And I've had the privilege of being able to follow this story. Of course, in the beginning, I was only a student learning from Tal Ibrahim and others, but I had the chance to document this process and be part of adapting all of these challenges and creating these solutions. And because, it's not always this scientific solution thing that sometimes the agriculture engineers are proposing something like, okay, we need to protect a garden with some sort of a greenhouse. But then the families would like, no, maybe we should have a shade house instead of a greenhouse because the sun is too much. And so they would be able to create some sort of protection from the intensive sun radiation in the desert. And that would help the garden to live a bit longer. Otherwise, let's not romanticize this idea of, a garden in the desert that would live for a long time. These are, gardens that are, first of all, small in scale. Second, they are only in some seasons because the extremes are really the seasons could be in extreme, times where it's impossible to grow anything. People just should stay inside and survive. But the engagement with these kind of practices is bringing something new that is allowing people to have a sense of sovereignty over their life, their food, and the ways of living with each other. I could go on and on and on with this, but I would love to invite you to the screen of the film so you could get in a sense of all the knowledge that is developing in this desert and see how this community is engaging with locally based and locally developed and locally created solutions. The solutions that we create may not work for any other part of the world. We are aware of that because not anyone lives in a desert. But the lesson is that every community should be able to develop the kind of solutions, the kind of interventions that would respond to those challenges, and that no one solution would work for us all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mohamed, for emphasizing the importance of collaboration and also drawing our attention to sustainability. Now we are opening the floor up for questions for Mohamed. Okay.
Thank you so much. I loved your presentation. I appreciated how you turned sun house into shade house. Could you explain sandroponics? How does that work?
Yeah. I did not turn the greenhouse into shade house. The families did. So it's good to credit them. It's important. Sandroponic garden is basically, at some point, there was a lot of talk about hydroponic gardens where people could grow plants directly in water. And people thought that, okay, if this could be useful, then maybe the Sahara refugee can take advantage of it. And actually, it was a model that was brought from the US here to the camps through the UNHCR. And the engineers who brought it there, it was very expensive and big and high tech. And then Tal Ibrahim, the agriculture engineer I mentioned, who is also featured in the film, looked at it and said, "There's no way my people would use this because it's very expensive, it's very complicated, and it requires a lot of input." So he and other engineers put together a very low tech model of how to incorporate something that we already have. We have a lot of sand in the desert, but we need some water. What the idea is that if you contain sand in some material, because the problem is that if you water a garden, the sandy desert will just suck all the moisture, and then the sun would evaporate the rest. So if you contain that in some material and have a medium that will protect the water So the water is in between the sand grains. It's protecting it. It doesn't evaporate so quickly because there is a layer of sand on top of it. And when you water the garden, the water penetrates between the sand grains, and because it's insulated from the ground, the families could actually have a hose in the bottom, and then it could be dripping some bucket or something outside. You collect that water and put it back. So you don't lose the water or the nutrients. Whatever amount of water you put it there, it's going to stay there all the time. And so before we had our sandoponic garden, we used to water our garden when we have it on the ground, and we would have to water it at least twice a day. That's very expensive for us because it just evaporates so quickly. But with the sandoponic garden, the model keeps the garden in moisture for a very long time. It went from watering it every day to watering it every other day, and then up every 3 days, every 4 days. We took it to a maximum of once a week. And then I took it to extreme of once every 10 days, and it still works. So can you imagine watering your garden only 3 times a month? That's a huge improvement on water usage to the garden. So this shows that the kind of intervention from the scientific, from the agriculture engineers, from the families and the community could bring together some solutions that would work for us. Thanks.
Any other questions?
Yeah. There's somebody yeah. There's someone in the back. Yeah. And we get.
Are there specific plants that you have to grow in the gardens, or can you guys grow anything?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, it's not really a fancy garden. It's about growing basic things that the families could have access to. But some plants and vegetables have been struggling, others are not. And so it's an experiment in which we will see how much or how many of the varieties could actually grow in this system. Because sometimes the desert is many kind of types. It could be sandy, it could be dusty, it could be rocky, you know? So depending on what kind of desert that we have in different places. So sometimes some of the rocky places may make it difficult for some of the root plants, how do you call them, like beetroots and carrot maybe to grow because it's a bit hardy. But sometimes if the sand is soft, and there's only sand, there's no rocks, then they love those air pockets between the sand grains. They just grow. But it's basic set of vegetables of carrots and tomatoes and leaves, kale as well, for example, things like that. Yeah.
Thank you. I see the relationship between your artistic creativity and the creativity that I see of transferring something tangible into growing. And so I have 2 observations and questions coming out of those observations. I really enjoyed the beginning of your film. When you saw the sounds of the desert and the sandstorm. And just a quick question, I've never been in a sandstorm. Is the sound of the sandstorm very loud or is it very subtle? Describe that for me.
Very good question. Thank you for asking. Sandstorms in the desert are really a very important element of our life. And they can be many things. They can be big and scary and noisy and dangerous. And they could be soft, quiet, could be mysterious. They're hard to predict, and they're hard to understand. That's why actually in making, throughout the process of making the film, I was asking this question, how can I tell my story? How can I tell this, make this film? And I started to observe rhythms of life around me, including rhythms of the sandstorm. It can be violent and dangerous, and it can be quiet and soft, everything else in between. And we don't want to try to understand how the sandstorms work because they have their own system, they have their own way of being, and it's just something you can be part of if it arrives, but don't try to understand it.
Mhm.
Now, those sandstorms could be scary and they could be life-threatening as well, but we're not angry with them. We know they exist, we do their thing, but they play such a very important role in our lives and life around the world. This doesn't come up in the film, but sandstorms from the desert actually carry huge amounts of phosphorus particles, and they cross the Atlantic Ocean to fertilize the Amazon. That's how important these sandstorms are.
That's unbelievable. I didn't know that much about them. But I also noticed the very strong aesthetic quality in that short film that you used to introduce your project. I also noticed in the film, I saw several people using, were they colored bottle tops or some round images, some round, um, you want to help me with that? Okay.
Got it. Okay.
So I want you to tell me a little bit more about the art, however you defined it, was made in connection to this project. So talk a little bit more about that for me, please.
That was a project that I had some years ago because, even in this remote place in the middle of the desert, plastic has made its way there. There's a lot of trash because of all the food aid that is packaged and brought there, and it's not responsibly dealt with, And this is, people have known the desert before this plastic pollution arrived. And I was very concerned about, the situation that we are living in. Of course, it's a politically enough complicated situation, and now there's layers of other complications of pollution and that is impacting people's life. So I was invited by this organization to create something in response to this. And part of that response was I got inspired by the famous artwork by Katsushika Hokusai, the Japanese artist who created the Great Wave of Kanagawa. And so I was concerned that this plastic arriving in huge quantities in this desert looks like a big wave that is going to crash on us. So I recreated the Great Wave using plastic pieces from around the camp. And then as part of that, I invited the kids from the local library in order to create something together. And I saw that there was a lot of plastic cabs in some places, so they went around bringing their own colors and their own plastic cabs. And I asked them, I didn't want to guide them. I only opened the space. That's how I actually collaborate with others. We opened the space and collaboratively try to create something. They said, we will want to create the world. I'm like, okay, want to create the globe. So I maybe help with some of the logistics of drawing and stuff, but let them fill and lead the process. So they created the globe using plastic cabs. And the irony hit me so strong that we are creating a plastic world. Thanks.
Questions?
Could you talk a little bit more about the role of Motif Art Studio as a community art space and the kinds of goals and I guess other tangents of this space in terms of how it's part of the community and sort of looking into the future.
So thanks, Anne. Multi-part studio is really small space, but the impact or the change that has came through the studio is really, it's a humbling experience for me to be able to experience this, to see it unfolding and developing into different things. My hope was only to see a space where creativity could flourish, for me and for others. And I witnessed some of the projects where people have come to create their own projects, and use the space or the tools or the possibilities there, but also sometimes just to stop and have a conversation, and to meet others. And I know some of the great collaborations that has taken their own form and their own direction, and some of the projects that I'm still part of, including, for example, some of the close collaborations that I am developing with my father, for example, who's also one of my main collaborators. We work a lot on documenting the oral knowledge of the Sahrawi people, and we do that in Motif Art Studio, but also the studio could be used for collaborative work and space for coming and having a conversation, or a place to also experiment with some of the ideas that people have. And nowadays, I have to be honest that I work more in the garden than in the studio itself. But the studio practice nowadays include such aspect of developing the gardens and inviting others to create their own gardens. So that's also part of the studio practice that we do nowadays.
So Casey is asking, hi, Mohammed. Wonderful talk. What is the ultimate goal or dream with this evolving knowledge of growing in the desert? Is the goal to have gardens for each family in the camps?
Well, thank you, Casey. I don't know, maybe that could be a person that I know. I'm not sure because I didn't see the last name. But what we hope is that to put the knowledge out and invite others to be part of this ever evolving and ever developing phenomena that we are experiencing. Because we know the people who come to these interventions also take it to their own hands and develop it in different ways. If the families could learn how to create gardens and be able to develop them, that would be wonderful. But it's not the hope, or it's not the goal that we will convert the whole community into farmers, because the Sahrawi are original nomads. Our community have lived for centuries as nomads. The gardens are surprising results of confinement and displacement in such refugee camps, and a sign of adjustability that our community have mastered over years and centuries. But I don't know if the Sahrawi could have the chance to live back in our homeland, whether they will continue to farm or go back to nomadic practices. But it's very important to open the knowledge and make it available to the community.
Any other questions? So,
Thank you for giving us the talk and coming here. It's really pleasure to hear and listen to your ideas. And my question is also Anne Holt introduced like you being part of different art forms, different biennials, documenta. I'm just interested like after you sharing the practice within different group of community, do you ever get reached by different engineers or scientists across the globe, reached you about, keep developing this kind of ideas, or you usually reach out to other people's too?
Well, the interactions definitely bring interesting comments and questions, you know. And I always say this, that there is enough, to some degree, there's enough understanding and knowledge about how to grow gardens everywhere. But to be able to grow a garden in such a place requires understanding of those places. So it's also input from the people who live in those spaces, you know. And I've said this previously, that maybe this centroponic garden would not work here or somewhere else. The people who are maybe struggling with food issues here have the knowledge of how to respond to it, just like we developed the knowledge of where we come from, you know. And it's very important to look at these issues from this perspective, so that we don't assume that some developed solution somewhere should fit everyone. But the input from such interactions is very important. Other aspects and layers to my practice that maybe didn't come out in the film was, for example, the research project that I was doing in Finland with regard to phosphate. Phosphate is linked to farming practices very closely, because our research was about the impact of phosphorus on the Western Sahara and the Baltic Sea. And phosphorus is used, processed phosphorus is used as a fertilizer in agricultural activities around the Baltic Sea. But the phosphorus used there is leaking into the Baltic Sea from those farms and created eutrophication. Algae blooms, algae feeding on that excess phosphorus and growing, in big quantities, causing oxygen depletion in the bottom of the sea. And scientists are talking about some dead zones at the bottom of the sea because of this practice. And I can't help but think of this paradox of a desert that is the source of phosphate, but little agriculture. And the Baltic Sea area thriving with agriculture, but turning its land into a desert because of the wrong practice of doing farming. So we got to look at where we are from, how we can respond, given the knowledge of not just from the scientific input, but also from the community, from the people who have led the accumulation of knowledges and practices in different places. Very, very important.
I like what you said about we have to look at where we are from. Here I was thinking that making work from my living room was a way to kind of like give myself a lot of excuse why I don't have to work in a week. So thank you for showing that video. It's personally for me, it inspires my practice and tells me to kind of like push further. My question is about the structure. Mud houses versus wood, right? How does the change of material or the introduction of newer materials influence the way you work and your thinking?
Yeah, you saw a lot of wood in constructing my studio, and you would think, this is desert, there's no wood there. Where does all the wood come from? That was a one in a lifetime opportunity. I would only have access to that because the flood destroyed many people's homes, and I gotta use all the broken stuff from furniture and things. Otherwise, I would not be able to use wood and build with it. And I used it just because it was available. Should there be any other material, I should have resorted to it. So it's not by choice. That's what I found, and I gotta use what I have.
Thank you for explaining that.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. But that also raises an opportunity to think about those materials that were there for a reason. So even in thinking about this, this tsunami of plastic, right? So how has, and I'm going to try to pull a double layer way of thinking about this in terms of the materials, but how have the materials and how has this, in a sense, new connection to the land in order to be more sovereign, food sovereign? How has these two materials, these two introductions into this this way of life impacted how you think about the past and present and the future, actually, because these are, we're introducing new things into, you said you didn't have a choice, right? So yeah, how is that impacting this kind of, I guess, daily practice and also your art practice in that way?
In living in such a situation, I've witnessed deep transformation in the community. And yes, I am saddened to see the loss of ways of living from the Sahrawi people who have lived as nomads for centuries, knowing the desert, reading the desert, and knowing how to live with as little as possible, food-wise, but also living-wise. To be able to pack your home in a tent, put it on the back of a camel, and have a home on the move is the most incredible possible way of living. With as little as possible, you pack your home on the back of your camel and move and settle with the food, with the family, with everything. And then to be able to witness life in the refugee camps with my people unable to practice that or develop it with the constraints and limitations that we live in refugee camps, and with the systemic structures that we are put in, food arriving from somewhere else that we did not create, that is impacting our health, packaged materials arriving and littering the landscape, a beautiful, open, clean landscape, desert landscape that we lived in centuries, and nobody changed it that way. It's really sad. So I hope that such art interventions could help raise questions about these kind of transformations that our community is going through, especially with regard to the kids who are the future, who are going to live in a different life, possibly different than mine now, and to see that it is possible through such art interventions only gives me hope that artists should continue to address such issues and to be involved with others in different communities, to respond to the kind of challenges we are facing.
It's especially poignant with the image behind you, with the tree.
Yes, I photographed these three actually many years before I became more involved with gardens. That was actually before I became more involved with gardens. And I just couldn't help but think that tree really wants to survive.
Okay.
It needs to survive.
Where exactly were you or are you located in the Sahara? That's one question. And then who were the indigenous people around you, and how did you interact? Not you individually, but how did the whole settlement interact with the indigenous people? And who were they? Location is the first.
I hope there's a possibility to show a map or something, but so we are located in the southwest part of Algeria. That's where the refugee camps are located.
Okay, okay.
But our people are called the Sahrawi people, the indigenous nomadic communities of Western Sahara, which is to the west of Algeria between Mauritania, and Morocco, facing
Okay.
the Atlantic Ocean.
Okay.
The,
Okay.
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, welcome. Okay.
Pull up a map.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, we take our last question.
Hi. You've spoken a lot about how kind of this very distinct culture that you see present and that has been disrupted from a lot of different forces in spaces, whether that be attempts at intervention leading to like lasting environmental effects. But you also speak about how you see different spaces like the specific sea that you talked about where there are farming practices, but they're damaging the environment. How do you think you would go about managing whether it be approaching or assisting like the sort of preserving culture, but also maybe adapting to a new and changing world that requires different practices, I guess. I guess in more in terms of like if a culture specifically is doing something that's not helpful to the environment or it's not sustainable practice nowadays in comparison to the past. How do you go about that?
Well, I think to go about finding our ways in a manner that would help us live but not impact the world around us in a terrible way, we need to understand where we are, where we come from. And so the transformation that has happened to our community from nomadic communities to refugees settling in one place and farming is the exception. It's not the norm. And as we develop these gardens, we are aware that we are creating something new in this ecology. The desert is not a place of gardens. We know that we are doing this for survival. It's very important for us to survive. But in doing that, this is not a project, because I get questions like this in the past. Oh, Mohammed, are you trying to green the desert? No, we don't want to green the desert. We want to keep the desert as it is, but we want to survive. Now, because we understand this is a long accumulation of interaction and intervention between us as human beings and the desert for a long time that has resulted in this way of living, we know that such desert ecology, it is because of all this intervention from us and other living things in this environment. And so, yes, we will introduce something, but not to the extent that we become the only dominant changers of this ecology. We're doing that because we understand that radical change to the desert will impact other ecosystems. We mentioned earlier how sandstorms are very important locally and internationally, globally. And I've heard about some of these mega scale projects of, okay, let's make big forests in the desert and cool we live in the desert. We know how hot it is. But we don't want to change everything, because if you green the desert, you possibly kill the Amazon as well and other ecosystems. And these are cycles and connections and processes and phenomena beyond the scope of understanding, because it's not happening in one generational cycle. It's maybe centuries of changes, But around the world, we have seen how human intervention in some places have led to catastrophic things, and we want to be wise. Let's not change this too much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much, Mohammed, for your talk. Applause. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today. This is our last lecture for the spring season, and so I would see you all in the fall for our next section. Thank you.